Calling the roll, Mr. Schron.
Here?
Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Hauser. Here. Ms. Baker. Here. Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. We have a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Councilman Miller is also in attendance.
Okay, great. Is there any public comment, really?
Yes, Ms. Lou.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Hello?
Actually, I before this meeting, I was in Cuyahoga Affordable Housing Alliance meeting. And of course, for our county, after recession, we really need to do a lot for our economy to grow back up again. However, please understand, the more projects you push through, sometimes we do get side effects. The gentrification is one big one. When you want to build lots of things up in certain neighborhoods, actually the existing residents in that neighborhood or the people trying to move to a neighborhood actually will be discouraged because lots of time the new developmental projects will go for the high-end apartments, high-end stores. Yes, that does help out to revive the economy for that local area, but that also drives lots of people away because of that. Plus, our public transportation system has not been helpful. So that actually eliminates lots of people's chances to get a better job in a good area, to send their kids to a good school in those areas, or even to live in that area. Now, don't even mention if there's healthcare issues. So please be aware of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any other comments?
No, no one else is signed in.
Okay, very good. We have one piece of legislation before us. If you'd like to please read that in the record. Oh, excuse me, sorry about that. We have minutes of the previous meeting from the July 16th meeting. Has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes? The chair will move that we accept the minutes. Is there a second? Second. Okay. Any discussion in regards to the minutes? Hearing no discussion, I'll call for the vote. All in favor of approval of the minutes of the July 16th meeting, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. If you could please read the one item into the record, please.
Resolution number 2018-0138, authorizing a sole source contract with Fund for Our Economic Future as fiscal agent for a collaborative of public-private funders in the amount not to exceed $1 million to support employment of county residents in up to 3 industry sectors in Cuyahoga County for the period July 24, 2018 to December 31st, 2021.
Thank you. Though I had conversations with Mr. Carter before in regards to this piece of legislation, I told him that we would be holding these hearings today. There would probably be a substitute, which I'll bring up in a little bit. But I also had indicated we'll do our best to see if we can take a vote and cannot dictate what will happen during this this committee meeting devoted to the full council. But there will be no vote on this legislation tomorrow night. I know this was not on the agenda for tomorrow night's council meeting, even if voted out today. So I don't want to have any expectation that on tomorrow evening this will not be heard again until the 12th of September, and because of our council calendar. So I don't want anybody thinking that that there was an expectation this will be heard tomorrow evening. So with that, I have prepared a substitute with substitute language that's been written and presented to the individuals within the body here and of the committee, and I will move for purposes of discussion to move the substitute language forward, and I believe the committee has a copy of that. If I get a second, we can just go and it's been moved and seconded. I would like to go through what the substance are of the 3 recommended changes that I have brought forth and moved on in regards to the original legislation. The first is that the funding site initially that was brought forth was coming from the Health and Human Service piece of the funding, and It's my belief that this is an economic development driver. Yes, we have used Health and Human Services for some items in the past, for example, such things as internship programs, but this is not a program of this nature. This is a program requiring over $2.5 million when fully funded. It's got folks from the Fund for Economic Future that are being forecasted as being the fiscal agents in regards to this is a program that, if and when successful, will be transformational for the county. And so I don't see this as falling into the same category as summertime programs for Health and Human Services. So that's the first change that is being recommended is where the funds come from. I believe that we as a county, we work very hard to convince the public that the health and human service areas are something we need funded for. And I do know that summer programs and other programs can help workforce, but this is really a transformational workforce project. And if it's that significant, when we look at that, this is a 3-year funding cycle that's being recommended by the county executive, of which $420,000 is first year, and $330,000 the second year, and $330,000 the third year. So if we can't find $330,000 in 3 years for economic development, then that's really kind of a disappointing thing. So I'm sure that if it's that important, we'll be able to find it. This second area that, and I'm not giving to you in the sequence that's on the piece of paper. Second area is that there were 3 sectors that were identified. The 3 sectors were manufacturing, medical, and IT. And from all conversations in regards to this with Mr. Carter and with folks from the administration, that manufacturing was one of the ones that looked like it was going to get teed up first. It made sense, and there's a lot of energy behind it. I'm not saying that because I have a bias towards manufacturing, but I do. But it is an area that it was explained to me that was the area that was going to most likely go first. So rather than guess for it, let's put it right there, make a public statement that that's going to be first. The second sector was that of the medical, and that was presented to us. And so that will be the second sector that will be stood up, and the third will be IT. On the IT, there is a great deal of movement going on. As a third point going on within the community around the concept of blockchain being an extension of the IT. And so rather than guess as to where that is going to fit and where it's going to play, that has been identified as a component within the IT sector. So those are the 3 recommended changes. Again, we're not going to be voting on this Tuesday night, so it still gives us 5 to 6 weeks if there's a good opportunity for debate between now and any final votes that might take place from this county, this council. So those are my 3 points. If anybody would like to, on the committee, like to comment on any of those 3 before we get any presentations, I would heartily encourage you to do that. Anyone at all? Yes. First, Ms. Baker. Ms. Baker.
Thank you, Chair. And I definitely do agree that the funding should come through the economic development. I think that is where this proposal is specializing in. And although I do see some parts of where it could be interpreted as an HHS expense, I think for the most part, it should come from the economic development and all that they do and all their experience and what they have done over the years. Also, manufacturing is another key component. I think we need to look into it with maybe a heavier view. So I would agree about the manufacturing. The blockchain, I'm not as familiar with that, so I'm thankful for the next 6 weeks to perhaps get a little more educated on exactly what that is. And we're only voting today to perhaps move it out of committee.
That's correct.
So I am supportive of this proposal.
Any other comments? Mr. Miller?
Just to say that I support the direction that you're taking this, and I think it's a two-way process, and I think that you're improving the legislation, and I appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, hearing no other comments, we have moved and seconded the, did we? Yeah, we moved and seconded the substitute. All in favor of the substitute language, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. The substitute has now replaced the language that's before us. After, when we get all the presentations and everything before us, we'll then move the, I'll take another vote to move the language, move this legislation out to the full council at the conclusion of any presentation. So at this point, I believe there's some folks that want to present, and we're going to ask questions to those folks too. So, Mr. Carter, how would you like to proceed?
Mr. Chairman, one, thank you for holding this follow-up hearing. We're excited to enhance your understanding of our initiative. And so the Chief of Staff, Earl Liking, is going to come up and kind of kick our effort off today, and then that'll be followed by Mr. Fineman, who will walk through a very methodical presentation around the mechanics and the specifics of Workforce Connect and our workforce efforts.
Okay, and I see that there's somebody also from another organization that maybe is involved in this legislation. Are they going to also be talking?
Yes, they won't be presenting, but Mr. Whitehead, who is acting, his organization is acting as the fiscal agent, is available for questions if the committee members have some.
Okay, well, with $2.5 million ultimately going to the project, Mr. Whitehead might have to anticipate he'll have some questions then.
I'm sure you can handle them.
I'm sure of that. Thank you.
I'm very happy to be here on behalf of the county executive and also myself as Chief of Staff to present this wonderful opportunity to leverage county funds through a public-private partnership where the county would contribute $1 million and our public-private partners would contribute another $1.5 million to be used to create good jobs for our residents by matching our residents with employers who have the jobs and who have the employment needs and the training needs. The $1.5 million commitment is coming from a variety of entities, including the Deaconess Foundation, United Way, the Cleveland Foundation, Ohio Means Jobs, Team NEO, the City of Cleveland, Fund for the Economic Future, Greater Cleveland Partnership, the City County Workforce Development Board, and the Gun Foundation. As has already been noted, Brad Whitehead is here from the Fund for the Economic Future. From Deaconess, we have Deborah Vesey here. And from the City County Workforce Development Board, Grace Kilbane is here this afternoon. This approach is a systemic solution to the problem of matching residents needing jobs with employers who have those jobs available. The unique strength of this solution is the aggregation of the employment needs of many employers in our area, so that the opportunity to match residents with jobs increases exponentially as compared to the opportunity that would exist if we were dealing with an individual employer and trying to match our residents to that individual employer's needs. Good jobs transform the lives of individuals and families. Interestingly, they also have the potential to transform neighborhoods. When I was a mayor, I chaired the First Ring Suburbs Consortium, and many of our neighborhoods that had at one time been very strong middle-class neighborhoods had developed blight and poverty, and the reason, really the principal reason, was the lack of good jobs for the residents. so that a program like this can be enormously beneficial to our individual residents who are seeking work and in need of work, but it can also be enormously helpful to our communities. We understand the desire to focus first on manufacturing and then the healthcare sector. We do think there is high potential in IT. Certainly, we understand the desire to postpone IT and focus on the first two until we see what opportunities there are in this important blockchain technology development. But we look forward to the opportunity over the next few weeks to talk a little further with you about the issue of how exactly we see all three of these sectors playing a role in helping our residents to get good jobs. And certainly there will be our IT opportunities in blockchain, but in addition to blockchain, others as well. With respect to the funding, we certainly will respect Council's wishes on that and take the funding from economic development if you so choose. We may want to have some opportunity to explain why we think this program is eligible for HHS funding, but certainly we will respect whatever decision Council makes with respect to the funding, because that's in your purview. At this point, it's my pleasure to present David Finerman, who's going to explain the details of the proposal.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the council. So I'm David Finerman with the Department of Development, here to talk about the specifics related to this systemic effort, as our Chief of Staff, Mr. Lykin, just mentioned. So I'm going to walk through a series of contextual information about the history of this, how it came about, and operationally how this would work. So really, just sort of to set the stage, we're trying to transform the county, right? All of us are trying to transform the county. It's really about working to eliminate silos within our own organization and across the county, silos in community organizations that are delivering services in our region. So the four things.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
can I assume, are you going to send us a copy of this presentation?
You should have
Hopefully they're in front of
We
you.
have it here. Okay, great. Thank you.
So there are four sort of topical areas we'll cover. One is related to the county charter and our county's strategic workforce goals. Two, the history and the context about the problems that are affecting our region. Discussion about this recommended solution to address some of these, again, systemic issues, and how the solution works operationally. So there are really 6 main points that you're going to hear today, and they're up on the slide, so I want to go through each one of them. The first is that employers are in control of the outcomes for our residents. They're the ones with the jobs. They're the ones that pay wages. They're the ones that can provide promotional opportunities and wage increases. And bringing employers together, because they're the ones that are in control over the welfare of our residents, is a critical thing. Number 2, job training and human services programs, many of which we fund, are more effective when they're directly connected to employers. And this strategy addresses that. Sector partnerships are effective. Nationally, there's many examples, and we'll go through one of those. Intermediary organizations provide a systemic solution. So this is not a programmatic effort. This is a systemic way of driving regional results. Number 5, employers in our 3 key regional industries, manufacturing, healthcare, and IT, will directly benefit by aligning their business strategy with their talent strategy. And number 6, county human services clients will directly benefit from this effort. So those are the 6 key areas, and we'll go through the details. So first, our county charter, the voters responded by saying that economic competitiveness, job creation, and economic growth are essential in order to ensure health and human services and help people get out of poverty. And so in response to the county charter mandate, in 2016, our county executive convened a group of public, private, and philanthropic partners. These are the funders in our marketplace that are funding human services and training programs, and established these 3 strategic goals to deliver the results that are outlined in the county charter. The goals I want to emphasize are fully incorporated into the strategic plan for our city-county Workforce Development Board and Ohio Means Jobs. And this is really a testament to region's leaders, including Grace Kilbane. Really, the interest is driving collaboration to drive regional and economic growth and inclusion. So the 3 goals: support business growth and profitability, specifically through a sufficient and steady supply of qualified candidates at all skill levels to keep jobs filled. The second, help residents, especially residents with employment barriers that keep them outside of the workforce pipeline, help them become skilled workers pursuing career pathways and wage pathways. And third, build alignment amongst the different public, private, and philanthropic funders. Right now, we are investing our separate workforce dollars separately, and we're talking about investing together, shared priorities, shared goals, shared measurements, shared outcomes and impact. So I want to talk briefly about what problems exist in our county to warrant these strategic goals. And it's really 3 things. Employers continue to report that they can't find skilled talent, and this is not a local problem, this is a national issue. And the one thing I want to pay attention to is, especially for small and mid-sized employers, and we have many of those in our area, they often lack strategic human resources planning and talent functions. The second thing, residents report that they can't get good jobs and increase their skills and their wages, especially our human services clients. And again, employers are in control. So our residents, they can't increase their work experience. Many of the employers require substantive years of work experience and skills, and they can't achieve those skills and increase wages without employers providing those opportunities. And third, our training and our human services program providers, they have challenges with enrollment, completion, job placement, and funding. And much of this has to do with, again, separate investments by separate funders who all have different outcomes that they require, and the funding may be time limited. So this is really a fragmented approach, and we're talking about a collective approach. So to give you a specific example of how this plays out, if a resident wants to become get a commercial driver's license and drive a truck, they may have to incur debt and it's $4,000 to $5,000 to go and get a commercial driver's license. If those programs are not well connected to every employer that needs people to drive a truck, there's no job guarantee, so they may not want to enroll in those programs. They may not be aware that there are training grants available. And many of the companies are also disconnected from these programs and these workers, and so a lot of the employers will only hire people with 2 or more years of experience. So residents can't get these jobs anyway unless employers are being thoughtful. So next, we have so many great programs. I mean, it's a really amazing problem to have. Our region is blessed. It's a fragmented marketplace with many great service providers. So as a resident, which is the right program for me? And as a business, which is the right source of talent for my business? Where do I go to train people? How do I get incentives? How do I support my employees? This is a systemic problem, not a program problem. because each of these entities listed have many programs, and it's pretty confusing for most people. So really what we're talking about is misalignment in 3 different areas. Misalignment in funding, so the federal government and the state and the county and the cities and corporate philanthropy and nonprofit grant makers, they all have separate investments and they all have separate measurements. And you can see many of these efforts are going to look at different things, whether it's contract performance or residents meeting basic needs if they're receiving food assistance or welfare, TANF. Economic growth could be a driver, or educational attainment. And then finally, again, it's amazing. We have many programs to serve youth or to serve people with disabilities or apprenticeship or former offenders or returning military veterans. And the challenge is that each of these programs stand on their own. There is no entity that connects the dots. There's no entity that's here to really look at how to address the systemic issue of fragmentation. So really what we're talking about is aligning the efforts of the funders, because the funders are the ones that create programs and create the measurements. And these are the clear targets that this funders collaborative brought together in order to connect the dots. It's a way to make it easier for employers to keep their in-demand jobs filled, a way to make it easier for our residents to get these great jobs, be on career pathways and on wage pathways, and get out of poverty, and a way for these funders to invest together rather than separately, invest in regional outcomes rather than individual program outcomes. So the recommended solution we're talking about, again, as our Chief of Staff mentioned, is an unprecedented public-private partnership related to workforce, where it's a $2.5 million total investment to reduce fragmentation and increase alignment. We're talking about 10 different funding entities, the county being one who would provide up to $1 million over 3 years in up to 3 sector partnerships for 3 different industries, and 9 other entities. All of these entities are already investing, and we're talking about investing together to reduce fragmentation. So an additional $1.5 million from the 9 other entities. We would put in 40%, these other entities put in a collective 60%, with some contingencies. So in the first year, we're talking about no money being spent unless all of the money is pooled. And in years 2 and 3, no money will be allocated unless performance measures are hit. So I want to talk briefly about what a sector partnership is, what an intermediary is, and really how this works operationally. So the $2.5 million, again, aligns program efforts so that employers, residents, and the region benefit. A sector partnership is a table. It's a table of employers that convene regularly to focus on strategies for addressing and responding to their common workforce issues and needs. They do it together, and this has been done at scale nationally. It's been shown to be effective. An intermediary is a convener. They bring the employers together along with these other community partners, whether it's K through 12 for long-term pipeline development, or community colleges for training and development right now, or the adult basic education or literacy providers, or even providers of talent like Ohio Means Jobs, our public workforce system, or the county's job and family services system. This table creates economic growth and inclusion opportunities in our region. So locally, what is this going to look like? It's a coordinated supply chain. In the bottom left-hand corner, the intermediary, they're responsible for convening, coordinating, aligning, and executing, and then reporting out. And who do they convene? So in the top left-hand corner, they convene the sector partnership employers in the three key industries, manufacturing, healthcare, or IT. They convene employers to identify the skill needs and the talent needs, and they use their industry expertise to communicate those needs to other relevant stakeholders. The first set of stakeholders is on the right-hand side. They're the three public systems, the state through Team NEO, and the city and county through Ohio Means Jobs and Cuyahoga County's Job and Family Services and Economic Development. The three entities have really the largest supply of talent, funding, incentives, and programs and services. And so our residents coming through these public systems are really the ones that we're after. And then as training or talent are needed, we go to number 4 in the middle. We're going to coordinate with the service delivery partners. So the intermediary convenes the employers to hear what they need, goes to the public system to leverage the people and the money and the programs, and then coordinates those service delivery partners. It's a supply chain. So I want to talk through one brief example in Maryland. This is in the city of Baltimore for their low-income, impoverished residents. Baltimore has a core focus on biotechnology, so a healthcare and IT connected play. And really a lot of the employers thought that people with advanced degrees were the ones that they wanted to connect with and hire. And what they found were those individuals were actually the ones with the highest turnover. They saw these technician jobs in biotech as a stepping stone for other opportunities or for advanced education beyond the bachelor's degree. And so they were leaving. And this particular sector partnership actually helped employers to tap into a new pool of talent coming through the public systems. And it's an entirely new avenue of opportunity, career and wage pathways for these low-income residents in their core industry, which is a combination of healthcare and IT. So the contract with the county, as you read, Mr. Chair, in the resolution, would be a sole source with the Fund for Our Economic Future. And the question is, what's their role? So the county will hold them responsible for facilitating the procurement and selection of intermediaries with input from these 10 funders. 2, they're going to act as the fiscal sponsor to allocate the funding to the intermediaries after everybody's contingencies are met and after all 100% of the funds are pooled together. Number 3, they're going to oversee the intermediaries' activities, and they're going to ensure that the intermediaries are held accountable for the results, and they're going to report on deliverables, metrics, and outcomes. So in summary, the 6 things that we talked about, and I'd like you to focus on, are employers are in control of the outcomes for our residents, and they really control the jobs, the pay, and the pay increases. Our training providers are more effective when they're better connected to employers, and residents cannot get out of poverty without increased wages. Sector partnerships are effective, and they're most effective in aligning existing public dollars and programs. Intermediary organizations connect the dots. They reduce this fragmentation in programs, funding, and metrics. Employers will certainly benefit from increased access to talent and training providers and incentives, and our county's human services clients will have increased access to in-demand jobs, training, and wage increases. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fireman. Questions from the council or committee? Anyone? Where do you want to start?
I'll start.
Ms. Baker, go ahead.
All
Ms.
right.
Vine, yeah,
If,
either both or one or all three. And then it's my belief that we've had presentations now from Mr. Fireman at this point in time, and so we'll go through those questions and brief presentation. No, you're welcome to stay up there, but no, but brief presentation. Yeah, don't leave your notes. Yeah, that's right. But then we'll get to Mr. Whitehead afterwards. So rather than try to mix it up, committee, so we can stay right with what we just heard from the executive's office, and then we'll go to the deliverers, if that's, everybody's comfortable with that? Does that work? Okay? Ms. Baker?
All right, and just hearing this now a couple of times, getting a little more acclimated with what you've been working on for quite a while. I guess the first thing I would ask is, in my time here, there are so many programs, and you have illustrated on one of your PowerPoint, all the different organizations that are out there trying to do what you're doing, whether it's Ohio Means Jobs, whether it's, Job and Family Services, and just many more that are in between those two. So what happens, I guess, to those many, many organizations that are out there trying to do what you're doing, maybe, as you said, fragmented, specializing in one thing or another, depending on the skills, or maybe drug addiction, or maybe skills that need to be, how are you going to take this massive amount of organizations out there and try to, it sounds like, if I'm right, funnel them into one organization that is then going to review and see the positives and weaknesses and push them out then to those employers you think is a match? I don't know if I have that question right, but just as I'm hearing, I'm just wondering how, on this massive scale that we have, that perhaps are being implemented in silos, and I agree with, I see a lot of that, how are you going to bring all that together?
Sure. So think of the intermediary as a broker. So when a resident or a consumer is shopping for insurance, there are many insurance companies that they can go out and seek, and they can do it one by one by one, or they can go to a broker who has knowledge of the marketplace and can help them access the services that are most appropriate for them at that time. 6 months goes by and their needs change. Maybe they've had a life event and they need to shop for additional coverage, and they go back to their broker and say, my needs have changed. What should I do now?
So if I may ask, so that's a massive amount of people, right? If in a perfect world, if they said, I'm going to the broker, I'm not going to the Ohio Means Jobs office, I'm not going to Job and Family Services, I'm going to go to the broker. How are you able to manage, especially in a short period of time that someone is in need of a job, how are you going to manage that person to get him the skills that they need when you have, perhaps, as what this is outlined to do, try and meet every one of those constituents that we have that are in need of a job?
So I'll give a brief answer, and then, I don't know, Mr. Carter, if you have a response. So these programs are not going away, right? We are not suggesting that.
Okay.
The public workforce system, Ohio Means Jobs, is a universal one-stop. It's a federal mandate.
That's right.
And we would never tell people not to go there. We want to encourage people to go there.
Okay.
That is a program. What we're talking about is some employers are going to want to go to a program like Ohio Means Jobs to seek people through them. And some want to get together with their competitors and talk about strategy, and then how to maybe leverage all of the other things that are available, not just through that one entity. Also, small employers. Maybe they want big company buying power, even though they're only a smaller entity. So there's a reason why people businesses would continue to go to these programs. There's a reason why residents would continue to go to these programs. And there's also value in a convening. So they're not, they don't negate each other.
They don't negate each other.
Correct.
But they do work together.
Correct. And the broker, the intermediary, is responsible for making sure they're all well aligned and well coordinated and complementary with one another.
May I ask just a specific question? The Ohio unemployment is where today?
I don't have those.
3.9. What is it in Cuyahoga County? Cuyahoga County? What is the unemployment? 5. What, 4 and change, so near 5?
Yes.
So,
And there's variance by population.
right. So I guess with the unemployment relatively low, is this change perhaps the focus of what it is that you would do in a lower unemployment than you would in a higher unemployment? Is this an effort to try and get those that perhaps are the hardest to employ, the workforce skills that perhaps are not even aware that is out there? I mean, where are we in a low unemployment for the most part? 5% is relatively low. Anything under 6 is not too bad, especially in Cuyahoga County where it could be certainly higher. Where are you, yeah, is that change your focus in this new program?
So unemployment statistics don't capture people who have stopped looking for work. Also, there are populations of people whose unemployment percentages are higher. And what we're recommending is that intermediaries first help people through the public system. So the people we're already serving, our residents who are receiving food stamps, who are receiving welfare, who are receiving Medicaid, why aren't they getting opportunities for economic advancement and inclusion? We should take our residents off the sidelines.
Okay, I like that and I agree with that. That's all good. All right, that's it for now. I'll probably come back, but thank you, Chair.
Other questions from anybody else in the committee? Uh-oh, then you better get ready. Sorry, guys. I was kind of hoping some of these were going to get asked by other folks, so, all right. We'll start, let's go back and peel it back to early on. You've got $1.5 million coming from what look like 8 or 10 sources. And how are we identifying where that $1.5 million comes from? I didn't see that here. I just see a total. Who's paying what?
Until this process has been finalized, we have some soft commitments from each of those organizations. So once this process matures, those commitments will start to crystallize. But we're confident that the aggregate will reach that $1.5 million that's been allocated toward the philanthropic sector. And if it's lower than that, then the county will scale its investment appropriately.
Well, I mean, soft commitments means I'm in for the program, I like the idea, or count me in for $250,000.
Count me in, amount TBD. And so Mr. Whitehead can speak to his organization since he's a.
Okay, and we got
potential
Deborah here, she
funder.
can speak to hers, so we got 2 out of 2, 2 out of the 3.
And I would say, Mr. Chairman, that we
2 out of the
wouldn't
10.
have advanced this request for funding if we didn't have a level of confidence that the philanthropic sector was prepared to step forward and make hard commitments. So
Okay.
it's always that chicken and the egg, right? Where do you start? And so this was an effort that the county enabled and was a catalyst for. So we felt it appropriate that we be the lead investment. And so so the pressure that and the discussions we've had about timing is to keep this momentum going forward, for the county to commit and declare its investment, and then have the philanthropic sector, which you're teed up to do in September, early October, follow quickly behind, and then get these intermediaries set up, sector partnerships set up.
I was listening very carefully to Mr. Fireman's comments, that no money unless all is pooled. Were those the words? I'm trying to identify, what does that mean? So that $1.5 million has to be in the bucket before we put our money in, or vice versa, or what does that mean when you say all has to be pooled?
So that means that each organization separately is going to their boards to ask for their allocation. And the Fund for Our Economic Future in their contract understands that no money will be spent from any of this pool of funding without all of the allocation being present. So our 40% and their 60% must be put into this fund before our 40% will be spent.
Okay, so how do we get our 40% back if they don't, that the Fund for Economic Future understands that we have the right to pull strings back and get 100% of that back?
Yes.
Okay, I see a head nodding from outside. We'll ask him those questions very clearly. Because I read the contract, I didn't see that in the contract. The contract doesn't make it sound like that unless I'm missing something out there. What will be the timing of each one of these launches? Not the sequence, the timing.
So I think Mr. Whitehead or Ms. Vesey might be best to talk.
What
to
is
that.
your impression, seeing how we're the ones that are driving this process?
There will be, once this effort moves forward, there will be a competitive process delivered through a procurement effort that the fund would lead. And I believe the letters and requests for proposal will be delivered later this year.
We find, we'll fast forward. We find intermediary one through this process.
Yes.
What happens to intermediary one, and when does intermediary two come online?
Intermediary one should be online at the beginning of next year if everything goes as planned.
So January is beginning of next year is the date. And I'm not trying to hold anybody to that fixed date. I'm just trying to get the definition. And then when does intermediary two go online? Is there an activity that causes it to go online, or a
Yes.
calendar that goes to go on?
It would be another competitive process. So each sector has a competitive process to find an intermediary who can meet the criteria that, again, the fund will be outlining in the competitive procurement process.
Okay, and is there a queuing up period that the first one's up and running at some point, and then the second one gets launched? Do we even have a ballpark? Is this a 6 months before the second one gets launched, or a year before the second one gets launched, or is there any way of, you're the one who's helping to craft this vision, so what is your vision?
Well, since this is only a 3-year horizon for funding, the hope is to have all three up and running as soon as possible. I know that there's an interest in having IT happen at a slower pace to ensure alignment with blockchain. And so I think a 6-month or an 8-month horizon is probably a pretty reasonable guess.
Yeah, it wasn't a desire to slow things down.
Right.
It was a desire to have things successful.
Absolutely.
And I personally don't believe that you could launch 3 massive projects simultaneously and expect success. I just have a hard time understanding that. So when you look at the language of what has been substituted today, I don't know if you had a chance to see it before, but it is to be substantially operational. Each one of those sectors before the next one gets launched. And we have 6 weeks to tinker with the language, but do you have any problem with, before the second one gets launched, that the first one's substantially operational before you start on the second one?
I think that sounds reasonable.
Okay, good. So what authority is the intermediary going to have?
Can you be more
Well,
specific?
one of the things that at least I thought I heard was that they're going to be the corralling factor to try to be a pointer to help point people in need. Will they have any authority within this intermediary capacity to do anything? Can they
Authority
actually,
over whom?
for this process, they're not going to, I don't want to say no. Trying to ask, what is their responsibility, other than to be the broker? And if we're going to follow the broker logic, the broker has no authority whatsoever in the real estate transaction.
Correct.
They're only a pointer. They point to the seller, they point to the buyer. Somehow along the way, the agreement has to take place, and they've been a person to help do the pointing. Is there going to be any authority in the form of this intermediary to actually circle wagons and help draw funds, to drive funds, to help drive thinning out of the educational process? Because quite frankly, I agree 100% with you that we have phenomenal lists. This is really confusing to an end user. There's absolutely zero way they can access effectively and efficiently. Only through somebody with authority can some of these things get thinned out. That's the Board of Regents, perhaps. That is the folks who are actually funders of some of these programs, who actually write checks to multiple, and they're as guilty as anybody. They write checks to everybody, and then they wonder why why there's a dilution. That's because everybody's getting a check from somebody around funding these things.
It's a fair question, Mr. Chairman. I think the way to think about this, and I want to emphasize, this is an entrepreneurial effort, so we're not going to be able to today answer every question. You know, you have the broad vision, and then
You got 6 weeks. That's the
right,
good news.
is to build out the architecture of this. But the authority, this isn't a government program. This is a public-private partnership where the authority is inferred from performance and accomplishment. So the sector partnership, as Mr. Fineman talked about, is really sector intermediaries to create a more efficient system. And so the authority is implied in their ability to accomplish that objective. And so there's no mandate that this entity will have to say you shall use, it's really, I don't want to use the free market term, but it'll sort itself out through.
It's okay. Free markets are all right. That's what economic development's all about.
Yep, but so performance and accountability will be the thinning out mechanism of placements.
So performance and accountability are going to be what's going to get to substantial performance.
And the data that this sector intermediary over time will have around needs by the employer and the success of placements by the intermediary and the providers, I'm sorry. So the good news here also, excuse me, Mr. Chairman,
It's okay.
is that we are not creating something new, right? So there's other geographies. Baltimore was one example, Boston, Washington, D.C. There's examples from across the country that we can draw on as we build these out. And so our consultant informed us that the raw ingredients exist in Cuyahoga County to accomplish this.
Who's our consultant on this?
Alan, what's Alan's last name? Brickman and Losey. So they were hired through the fund to evaluate and assess the efficacy of establishing. We're happy to get you a copy of their report and assessment.
Please do.
Okay.
We'll distribute it amongst the committee. When, well, I'll get my continuity going, then I'll let you pick up unless it's on this exact point.
No.
Okay. So we've got, you indicated that there was some models that we're using, the Baltimore, I think I heard. Who was the, in this particular case, who was the intermediary in Baltimore?
It was the entity that's on your slide, which is the Biotechnical Institute of Maryland.
Created from scratch, or did it previously exist?
I don't have the specifics, but I can get that information for you.
Please do, because I mean, if you're using that, when people come in here and say, this is the capstone, this is success, I expect you to have everything to know about what that success factor was. I mean, it's just kind of reasonable that if you're going to tell me that's what the model is, that we're about ready to spend $1 million worth of taxpayer money and $1.5 million worth of public service money, I would appreciate knowing why that should be a model we should be following.
Fair point, Mr. Chair.
I'm not judging.
No. That was one example. So Mr. Fineman did
did
say
sit on the bench years ago.
This is, the best model. Is an example that shows placement, particularly from low-income communities to,
All I'm trying to do is if we're trying to model something, I just want to know what the model is that we're trying to follow, and was it created, because, and I'm sure that Mr. Whitehead would love to know too, is he going to be looking for intermediaries that are already in existence that are going to be bidding, or some that are going to be cut from fresh cloth that have never existed and they're going to make a pitch? So
could be a combination. So anyone's eligible, but so
Okay.
it could be either or.
Well, I'm just trying to go back to your Baltimore example, and now with that Baltimore example, you said that sometimes a competitor might not be happy with, they might actually be a competitor with the intermediary, is what I thought I heard you say.
I was suggesting that a sector partnership, when employers get together in the same room, they're doing so with their own competitors.
Okay? And how well has that worked historically?
So this is an example of employers in biotechnology coming together, talking about their shared problems and their shared processes. They're all screening people for advanced degrees.
Okay?
That, according to this document that I pulled it from, they all agreed then that actually higher level training wasn't required.
So they defined the scope of the need, but did they cooperate as far as the personnel that were going into the pool and things of that nature?
So what this intermediary is doing is connecting the talent supply to each organization so each organization can make their own decisions within their own process. This table allows employers to hear from other competing employers that they all have the same problem navigating those fragmented marketplace of providers, and they all want help and they want to do it together.
Because, and the only reason I'm curious about that is because one of the individuals that was asked a couple of weeks ago to talk on behalf of this from UH focused on the fact that her objective was that they were a differentiation of $3 an hour, and she made a point of that. And I thought, boy, I hope we're looking at bigger picture stuff than somebody worried about, I'm competing with one of my fellow medical facilities here in town, and I'm worried about $3 an hour. That's, in my opinion, that's not big picture stuff. That's pretty nickel dime. It's not to the individual, but $3 an hour. And I get your nodding that you probably would tend to agree that was micro, not macro problems out there. So I'm worried when you've got competitors, if they're worried in that respect out there. Curious as to the selection for a sole source contract. How often do we do that?
To be more specific, Mr. I mean, that's a broad
We're
question. So
getting
it's
ready to
kind
pick a sole source contract in this legislation from just one organization of all the potentials that could be doing this function, this facilitation. And this legislation picks the Fund for Economic Future.
Sure. I think
So I'm not trying to talk about them, I'm trying to talk, we as a body generally shy away from sole source. If it's good enough to compete for the intermediaries, why isn't it good enough to compete for the fund facilitators?
I can't answer the question broadly within the county. I'm sure it's the exception rather than the rule. In this instance, the funding collaborative felt that we had to find an entity that had the expertise to manage this effort, as well as someone who had a relationship with the county. So the fund fortunately has an existing relationship with my office in terms of research and strategy, and so we have an existing mechanism in place. And so there was a general level of comfort by the Funders Collaborative to identify an entity within the county that had an existing relationship for us to use the fund as a mechanism. So I would say it was based on expertise and, to a degree, expediency, so that we could move this forward in a
But wouldn't that have come out through a competitive process regardless?
maybe, but we elected to go this route, Mr. Chairman, and so that's a hypothetical at the moment.
Well, it's not hypothetical, you picked them. We're past hypothetical. I'm trying to identify when this body is being asked to adopt a sole source. That's very rare that this body picks a sole source without the competitive process when, I mean, I thought we heard
Yeah, I would say the other.
Deborah Vichy present just a couple weeks ago about they'd spent a year and a half to get to this point. I didn't even know why their body couldn't have helped select these folks and on that. I'm just trying to find why a sole source just strikes me as unusual.
I would say the other thing with this isn't a typical procurement, so the fund is not directly benefiting from this funding. This is a pass-through funding for the most part through to manage and execute this effort.
The fund won't charge anything for
You can ask
administration?
Mr. Whitehead specifically the question, but I don't believe.
Well, no, but we're the ones,
Yeah.
we're the ones that are building the budget, I assume. Do we, I saw the contract and it's got a budget that's built for it. Who built the budget?
The budget was built by the funding collaborative team, so the members of the funding chairs, co-chairs, developed the budget.
And on here,
With some advice and input from the consultants that did the report.
so the county is putting in 40% of this and we didn't participate in the budget building of this?
Yeah, like the co-chair, so Mr. Fireman is co-chair, so as a member of the co-chair's body, there was county input to that process.
And communications makes up, it looks like, between forums, communications, and communication consultant, looks like it's making up, over $200,000 of this budget. Is that, what are all we communicating in the $200,000 to put this program together?
Ms. Vesey, as the chair, is probably best equipped to answer that question, but the committee, as a general matter, felt that it was important, particularly to the community-based organizations who are going to be assisting with the developing the supply of talent from these neighborhoods, that it was important to communicate to community-based organizations, the business community, and the community at large, what this effort is, since it is a shift, it's a paradigm shift from the model that historically existed in this marketplace. And so communications is important, as I think you would agree.
I agree, communicate. If you look at any organization, the first thing that'll always be shown is the one weak link. It'll always be communication. So I don't question the need. I just was questioning what was going to be done. It says on this budget that in regards to revenues, future sources would be membership fees paid by the employers, registration fees, and sponsors for the events. So if this is the go-forward strategy, has someone modeled those fees and what it's going to generate and how this is going to be a continuation? It says for the first 3 years, it's assumed these revenues will be from support provided by the members of the funders groups, but after that, it's going to come in from, it sounds like the employers. Has someone modeled this? And if so, maybe the Baltimore model can show us how that's been retained. And have we checked with the medical community? Are they willing to continue to, and willing to fund this on a continuation basis, the manufacturing community and IT?
We'll get back to you on that. The modeling for sustainability is essentially what you're asking. What happens after this
Yeah, I mean,
period?
yeah, I mean, it's, the easiest part is us to write a check for $1 million. That's, I mean, realistically. The hard part is the sustainability, and I'm just reading directly from how the budget was written and built.
Can we get a copy of the budget as well? I don't see.
Sure, it's, I'll get
sent
a copy.
previous,
That Khalil, I think, has got all that, so if you haven't gotten it, I'll get a copy from
I've
everybody
never
on that.
seen that.
Apologize in that respect. And this was, looks like it was written about 2 years ago, at least according to this, it was July 12th of 2016 is what it's all coming from, at least the packet that came to me. And my assumption is this is all coming off the back of the contract. I'd asked for the contract, the draft language of the contract. That's probably enough talking from me. I'll listen. Now open some dialogue. Mr. Miller, you had some questions you wanted to ask?
Mr. Chairman, actually, I was going to go in the same direction that you went into about the facilitation entity itself. As much as we love the Fund for Our Economic Future and the important role they play, my question is also why that essential process itself was not put out for some kind of competitive process. Thank you.
Well, we heard from, I think, from the administration. Any other questions before Mr. Whitehead? We appreciate you being here. Perhaps that would make sense to Khalil. If you could get those things sent to everybody too, I appreciate it. That was my fault for not asking the contract to be sent to everybody else. Any other questions before we ask Mr. Whitehead to come up? Brad, would you mind coming up and answering the questions as to why you should be a sole source contract?
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Because everybody else took a step backward.
Sadly, you have to put your name on the microphone. That's what you're.
I made a joke there, said because everyone else took a step backward. No, actually, we're doing this as.
Please put your name on the record. Sorry, we know who you are, but
I'm
the
sorry,
piece of
Brad
paper later
Whitehead,
on won't.
President of the Fund for Our Economic Future, which is a collaboration of the philanthropic community here in Northeast Ohio. So we're doing this as a pure investment. So it'll be, we're investing time of our staff, our auditors, and others at no charge to the county. And so as the funders sat around and talked about how we were going to do that, we said, if you need someone, we're willing to do that, and that can be an investment on our behalf to this collaborative. If somebody else would like to do it, that would be great. But as I said, we're willing to do it as an investment.
Okay. Ms. Miller, there you go. The dialogue's open now. It's yours. Do you have any question? Any other question? Sure.
So What does that mean, that it is purely an investment? What do you mean by that?
That 100% of the funds that come in will be passed through, so that we're not getting any sort of administrative fee. Sometimes when there's a fiscal agent, they'll take an overhead charge. We're not doing that.
So there is no fiscal advantage for you to be a partner in this effort?
There's a strategic advantage in that we have a common goal, but no, this is actually at a cost to us.
Is that going to be I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
Does that constitute an in-kind towards that 1.5 then? On that?
No,
Okay,
no, that would be on top. So we're looking, if county moves on this, we're planning to bring a grant forward to our funders in early September with a cash that would be to the 1.5, and then the investment of time of our staff is not on the books, as it were.
okay, so it's not an in-kind
That's
exchange for
correct.
that, yeah. And I'm not
It's
looking
actually a
to,
good idea. We probably should keep track of that, but it's
yeah.
presently not. Yeah.
sure, I mean, it's, time is money, as we all know. I think Abraham Lincoln or somebody like that
Yeah.
said something about that. The amount of money, I'm not trying to fix you on it at this point, Mr. Whitehead, but do you have a range that you're planning on so that we have at least a sense of where other folks are
Yeah.
coming?
Absolutely. So we haven't put it in front of our funders yet, and it's a vote of the funders, but we're anticipating coming in with a $200,000 over 2 years, so $100,000 per year for 2 years. And we're hopeful that'll pass, and so far early signs are that as long as the county's there, our members sound supportive. We were very happy to have been involved in the formation of the Connexus Sector Workforce Partnership in Summit County a couple of years ago, and that sailed through with our funders, and we're proud of the work there.
In regards to, have you been on this project then for a while? As far as the Fund for Economic Future, like building the budget and stuff like that? My reading was just lifting it right from the draft budget, which talked about the fund for sustainability has to come from the employers.
Yeah.
Have we done any modeling as to what employers are willing to do? Because I'd be willing to bet all these employers, they already belong to GCP, MTMA, MPAMA, all the trade associations. So they're already writing checks for 5,000, 500, whatever, fill in the blanks to other groups that they believe are doing this. And that's why the question of authority came in, because I know the GCP has money that they put forth for workforce. I know that NTMA has money they put for workforce. I know that PMA, just in
Yes,
these sectors.
exactly.
Every single one of these groups does.
So we don't know what will happen in the Cuyahoga County market. What we do know is that elsewhere in the country, the users are funding all or a portion of the support. We know that that's happening in Summit County as well, although again, we're the philanthropic community is continuing to fund it. But that's part of what we're needing to sort out in these initial years is what is the model and what are the economics that will come through over time. I think the comforting news is that we're expecting that participating in the process will be many of those organizations that are currently receiving funding from manufacturers, whether that's the Chamber, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, and the like. So they'll be a part of this journey as well. But that's why we're giving it the multi-year runway, is because we don't know the answer to that question.
If that does not happen, will the Fund for Economic Future stay involved on infinitum if it's a long-term future financially?
Well, I think it's important to note that, well, first of all, we're committed to sector workforce partnerships over the long haul.
Okay.
We're also committed to making sure that the model evolves as appropriate over time. And so I think as a funding collaborative, those 10 entities will be constantly assessing and reassessing as we go. And I think the track record of those funders, and I'd like to think our fund, is that over time we've stayed the course with the initiatives that we have followed. So you have something like the bioscience cluster and bioenterprise, where in the early days that was 100% funded with philanthropic and state of Ohio support, and now some 14 years later, it's still not 100%. It's at 50%, and we've continued to evolve those models over time, and it's going to be an evolutionary process. I think we think our funders are committed to this in the long haul, but we're going to have to pull our head up at each step of the way and understand what's working and what's not, and are the people that are benefiting contributing to the solution.
Well,
That sounds evasive, I'm sure, but I think we're going to have to understand what the customers are saying as this goes.
well, the Fund for Economic Future is well respected in this area. Do you believe you could have an impact on, which Mr. Fireman pointed out, that 45 schools are touching some of these, probably these three sectors? What's the risk, what's the opportunity? The opportunity is huge. The chances that they will say, hey, I'm going to drop my program for X around nursing, and I'm going to support yours because I think ultimately we can't afford to have all three of us fighting, or two of us fighting for the same exact space. And that's where the dilution takes place.
I think that's right, but what we learned over time in our work and is that it's perhaps more important what we feed as what we kill. And so if a group of employers and a group of funders are coming together and saying, this model A, B, and C seems to be working, let's feed that with the way we do the work through this sector partnership, let's feed it in the way that we do our grant making and elsewhere, those will be the pieces that flourish. We take great comfort in seeing what happened right here in Cuyahoga County with a program called Work Advance a few years ago that I think it may have even been reported at least to the Economic Development Committee at the county, where we saw simply through the kind of coordination that's being talked about here, we saw dramatic improvements in workers advancing and getting good salaries and being put on the path to family-sustaining jobs simply through the sort of facilitative function that we saw here at no increase in investment.
Sadly, some of the feeding doesn't come from your groups. It comes from the state. It comes from other places. And just as great as our institutions are here, sometimes they have multiple programs that overlap significantly, and they're very reluctant towards ever dropping them.
Without a doubt. But if we
And
have...
that's how we get efficient, by ultimately getting the best. That means sometimes having to tell people you should really drop programs, because 45 schools is just astronomical.
I can say amen to that. If we have a bona fide group of employers in a group putting their stamp of approval on something, that gets us immeasurably closer, I think, than where we are today, which I would characterize more as a jump ball.
Is this group intended to be a lobbying group at some point to actually help shift those programs out and to thin them out? I mean, somebody's got to have that. If this is going to be the intermediary around these three sectors, somebody needs to thin some of these programs out.
We don't know what the legal structure will be. It's being set up to be facilitative to making sure work happens on the ground with employers and employees. An advocacy function, currently is something that exists over in our chamber and other places. So I don't know the answer to that, but it's not being put together with an eye towards advocacy, just given the nature of who the funders are.
Okay, well,
Not to say it's not a hugely important role, but as foundations, we have to be very careful about that. And I know as public sector entities, you need to be careful as well.
yeah, well, unfortunately, educational sectors very rarely like to give up programs, and they like to maintain them because they have 4 students or 6 students when somebody else could be doing it. But
Yes.
if this is being raised as a complaint or concern about what the system looks like, then if this is truly going to be addressing, if we really want to be transformational, I think we have to be looking at that. In your mind, what does success look like with this program?
success will be where employers feel like they have a place that they can turn to have a steady flow of people who can fill the jobs that they're creating, and that for our residents who not only can find a job, that 4.5% unemployment rate, but feel that they're on a career path to a better job that offers a family-sustaining wage. Currently, we have the situation where a lot of the people we have who are living in poverty are working, and they're in jobs that feel like they're a dead end. If we can create pictures within industries of how I can start today in a job and see my way advancing to the next job and the next job and the next job and building skills along the way, that will be success for our residents.
Do you think that I've been a broker of other sectors for a long time, but it's some of the other sectors that perhaps are more entry oriented to do exactly what you said. One doesn't enter as a CNC machinist or a nurse very easily. Those are.
Mr. Chairman, I think what you may be referring to as well is in some of those very high turnover jobs that we see, or that with entry level, what we see is extraordinary variability, and that some employers have really high turnover, and other employers have lower turnover because some of them have figured out how to offer advancement opportunities and to provide the training and to see their way through to the next job. And David Finerman talked about taking this supply chain approach, and without getting into the minutia of that, by taking that end-to-end view of what can be somebody's path, at least elsewhere, we've seen reductions in the kind of turnover that is so frustrating to employers and causes so much pain to individual people.
The question I asked to Mr. Finerman was the sequence of launch and seeing how it looks like once we hand you $1 million, our conversation is pretty well over with. What is your vision of the sequence of launch? Actually, it's not in the way I have written.
I think the way you wrote it, I got to come back to
Yeah, well,
every quarter.
if that has to get passed. That has to get passed. And sorry about that. There was a fourth item. It was to have accountability. I apologize. And that was to have accountability, which was not in the original draft. What is your sequence of launch as you perceive it? We've got 3 sectors we've identified.
Yeah.
What causes you to kick off the second sector?
Here, it's a completely unsatisfying response, but I like what you put in there, is as fast as is feasible. I think as we get into this first one on manufacturing, we're going to understand whether this is brain death to try to put this together or whether it goes smoothly. If it goes smoothly and it's up and it's launched and it feels like it's a good with good momentum, we get going immediately on the second. If it feels shaky or that there was a tough negotiation in order to get there, that means it goes more slowly, which is I would love to hear more from you about what substantially operational means in that language. But at the high level, I'm tracking you on that as well. Is we need to. We all want to go as fast. I think we all want to go as fast as possible, but not just launching stuff that then falls all over itself.
Well, Khalil and I worked on those words, and we wanted these next 6 weeks for you to define those 2 words.
But I think if we can have, and this is Brad speaking, not the Funders Collaborative, but if we can have a launch of a sector partnership and a solid 90 to 180-day plan, which everybody seems to be clear on, that would have me personally feeling comfortable with launching. If we're still bickering about what's happening over the next 90 days or leadership's not clear, well, then I think we need to get that squared away. But again, this will be a work of these 10 funders, sorting out kind of where we collectively are in all this. And our role is that of a fiscal agent, kind of working with that group.
And I don't know whether or not blockchain is going to move at a fast pace, but it'll be a great example to have both of these going simultaneously. one which is being almost exclusively driven by the private sector. And if it means that we blend them back together again at the end in Sector 3, so be it.
Well, I wonder if you might clarify that, because we're hoping that this work is also driven by this private sector, and that's why I think it's sensible that you have connected blockchain as you have, because blockchain is going to be, I suspect, equally reliant on workforce systems to turf
Absolutely.
up people who can deliver coders and all
Absolutely.
these other folks. And what's important is that employers are the ones who are stating and articulating their needs, and then the system adapting to that and ensuring that it's responsive to the needs of families.
Well, and I think that if everything works well, it could be that they both are simultaneously feeding off each other. And by the time we get to the third phase, the county will have saved ourselves $320,000, and we won't need to spend it on the third sector, which would be a nice way to return taxpayer money. The funders wouldn't need to, and it's up and running. So with that, other questions based on mine, or yes, Mr. Miller?
I have two big sector questions. The first is, to what extent, if this works as planned, are we going to actually be creating additional high-quality jobs, or are we mostly going to be changing the group that gets on the right path to economic success, but not really changing the job availability?
Well, that's a great question. I think you've set forth really what our twin goals for this program, because what we know from the economic research and also just the conversations with companies and employers, the rate limiting factor for our economy today is the ability to have the talent in order to grow. And so by having a more efficient talent supply chain, we ought to be able to engender more growth. At the same time, we know that we have too many people are in dead-end, high turnover jobs, and that by giving meaningful career path opportunities, we ought to be and need to be improving the lives of citizens as well. And so ultimately, in the vision of what this is, it becomes a reinforcing cycle where we boost our rate of growth, which will boost population growth and will cause us to be more vibrant overall.
The other question is based on knowing how many low wage and mostly not with progress available kind of jobs are out there. I mean, in this country, we've got millions of low-end store clerks and restaurant workers and even a lot of the human service workers, like at the nursing homes. The pay is extremely low. My question is whether we can make substantial progress on alleviating poverty given the current wage structure we've got, or do we need an across the board better starting place? And I'm not saying it has to be $15 an hour like some in the left wing are proposing, but if people could start at $11 or $12 an hour instead of $8 or $9 like it is now, it would seem to give people a better place to start with. I'm wondering what you think about that. Would that be a big help, or can we get where we want to go with the current structure we've got?
Well, I think what you set out is one of the things that a program like this can begin to do, is it establishes a table for a good conversation about what is holding back the outcomes in any particular sector and the like. We at the fund have been spending a lot of time and energy on how do we enable more good jobs. One of the things that we focused on, it seems like everybody can get behind, is that, look, there is the wage, and then there's all those things around it. We're particularly fixated on, for instance, the transportation cost of being able to get to a job. And so if I have a job that pays $11 an hour, but I have to either own a car or have some transportation that effectively costs me $2 an hour, that means that my effective wage has gone down. And so there are a lot of ways through creative thinking we can think about raising effective wages. Some of it may be the wage itself, but it's all those other things that are involved as well. The cost of training, the cost of transportation, the cost of other social barriers and the like. And by having these employer tables, we actually have a group to engage in a meaningful dialogue about what's holding us back and what's right for a sector.
What's a good intermediary? Seeing how you're going to have to be picking three, what does a good intermediary look like?
Credible employers, an ability to see systemic solutions, where I think we have an economy that's has got a lot of innovative programs, but they've largely been workarounds. So I have a large employer and I can do a special program that fits my need, but it's somebody who can see that we need to have a solution that fits small, medium, and large size employers alike, which requires a system solution. And then a group of, I think, employers and an intermediary who understands the kind of questions that Mr. Miller just raised here, is that they believe in this idea that we need to put people on a career pathway to having a family-sustaining jobs, and that benefits the employer in the long term and benefits certainly the individual and the economy. So that sort of credible employers who see systems and are committed to providing more meaningful career paths because they know it's good for business and good for the economy.
I guess I'm struggling with what I thought an intermediary was an individual or an organization.
An intermediary is the...
For purposes of this program here.
An intermediary is the organization that is connecting with the employers.
Right, okay, so tell
And
me...
so if we really need an intermediary who has got the voice of the employer at the table as opposed to the voice of staff.
Yeah, okay. Then you did this in Summit County. That sounds, at least if I picked up your comments. Tell me how you went about selecting that intermediary and give me the track record of what happened there.
Different process, but it was through a collaboration between the funding community, Summit County, and the United Way, as well as the city of Akron, and then a group of, it was sequenced as well, started with manufacturing, and it was a group of manufacturers who were working on this, and we've gone now from a place where workforce was the biggest complaint to at least feeling like it's on a good path. The employers seem happy with where it's going. They have taken, I want to say, 8 key occupations and have defined career paths. They've got apprenticeship programs in place. And so I wish I had the numbers with me today, but there's a sense of momentum.
And how long has that been in play?
Meaningfully, maybe about 2 years.
Substantially operational at this point?
Substantially operational, thank you. Yes.
Okay, yes.
But it was probably a 2-year birthing process, much as this has been a 2-year birthing process.
So 2 years is not going to be an unreasonable number to expect if that was, you stood up manufacturing, so to get to the point where you've looked at that and said, yeah, that's working.
Much like this sector partnership has been a long time in the making. You referenced the July 2016 and where we're sitting in July 2018. It was a similar long runway in Summit County. And then I want to say they went for 6 months in manufacturing before dropping in IT.
Okay. And then do they drop, you said they dropped 8 altogether?
No,
Or
that
there
was
8
within-
subcomponents
that
within the
was
manufacturing?
manufacturing.
Okay. How many did they drop altogether? They dropped IT and manufacturing, anything else?
I think it's just the 2 right now.
Okay, all right. Could we get anything information on what went on in Akron or from you?
Yeah, it would be. I think it would be well worth learning from that experience.
Yeah, if we can grab whatever in the next couple of weeks, that'd be great. And then we'll disperse it to everybody. So that would at least give, and how was it funded?
Initially, it was funded by the county, it's been funded by the county, United Way, and philanthropy. And increasingly now, the manufacturers are stepping up. I don't know what the percentage is.
Okay, but it would follow this line on the budget that somehow the individual organizations now are picking up the tab
Correct,
in regards to it?
correct.
Okay, that'd be great to get all that available for us. So we've got a couple weeks before this ever comes to a final legislation. Mr. Miller?
I have one more question, and I'd invite your comment on it. I have some concern about the 3 separate sectors, which could be 3 silos, and what we really need is for people who start out working as a store sales clerk or as a restaurant worker or as a minimum wage job at a nursing home and how do these folks get themselves into one of the sectors and get on the right path? It seems like we might do better if we're looking at the total employment system and have ability for people to move across areas and if we just stay within these sectors, you might still have this whole group of people out there that's stuck in these dead-end jobs.
Yeah, that's such an important insight that if we look at somebody's career progression, that it may not be solely with one industry. When we get some of the technical things like machining and so forth, it can, but the best place to find a bank teller is probably in a fast food franchise. And so there is interesting experimentation going on today about developing these supply chains across industries. I believe that this system can be robust with respect to that, because if a good intermediary is looking there and they'll say, okay, at the front end, where and how are we sourcing talent? They ought to be able to do that sort of outreach, as opposed to what we have today, which is everybody trying to fix everything without a real sort of understanding what are the flows like and how do they unroll. Because your point is exactly right, is that the supply chains don't necessarily flow just within one industry.
Yes, and I think one of the biggest impediments we have is people hiring workers by asking, well, who's done exactly the same thing as
Right.
what we need, and it would be better if there would be more asking of, well, who has the right basic abilities or the potential to get them? Not
Yes.
because you can learn the specific tasks.
Yes, we're with you 100% on that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that a couple things, as my final comments, the German model is interesting in some respects, that they don't care where the person goes within the sector, as long as the sector keeps them engaged, that they could end up at Bosch, they could end up at Porsche, they could end up at Mercedes. The sector doesn't care. When we get to that point, that's when you really have gotten to success, because you will get your share of quality if you're in that sector, if you've taken care of the sector. The problem that we experience and that they don't is that they do slap hands and they say, you are not going to work in this area, not the individuals, the educational institutions are not going to put in multiplicious organizations doing the exact same thing. You can drive right around here and know that there's, I think I've heard the rumor there's 600 organizations that have the word economic development someplace in their charter, and there's over 300 that have workforce in their charter. And so until they actually start to thin that out and say, no, you do a better job, we'll care more about the sector, I think we're still going to be challenged out there. And that means the educational institutions too.
Yeah.
They keep talking about the Board of Regents that we're not going to fund some of those programs, and until they actually do that, I think you're going to have some people fighting.
Well, that may be the best underline to a lot of this, is that if we can at least have alignment among those of us, public sector, philanthropic sector, private sector, who are feeding the beast that you described, at least the alignment is a decent starting point. It's not the answer, but it's a step forward.
And as you go forward, I would just suggest one of the things, and I'm not saying this is the perfect model, but on the block land program, they have the entrepreneur as part of one of those sectors, subcomponents. And I hope that was in your Akron model, because so often it gets left out. Because Mr. Miller keeps bringing up low-wage jobs, but I'd be willing to bet if we check with Jacques Burrell, Jonathan Sawyer, Michael Simon, they all started as a cook or a chef. Every one of them, I'll bet, if you track their history backwards. And they all learned that entrepreneurship was a component of that, which every one of these sectors has an ability to have an entrepreneur of doing something and creating, even if it's only for another 5 jobs or 15 jobs or whatever happens to go in. So with that, yes, speaking to an entrepreneur, a true entrepreneur at the other end, started a small business, she and her husband, so a perfect model.
Well, thanks, and just a little clarification, I guess, before you leave, and it's good to have you here. We talk about dead-end jobs, and we talk about the unemployment at being 5% in Cuyahoga County, and then we talk about people who are looking for work, and then those that want to advance from the jobs that they're in. How do you, or is your role to, because what we have found here is that people could have multi-issues. That when we talk about social barriers, we're not just talking about perhaps needing a GED, perhaps had some incarceration, perhaps they are in need of childcare, transportation was mentioned, of course, workforce training, maybe drug addiction. Where are you on that piece of development when it comes to knowing that you're trying to help those that are trying to advance themselves, and they come to you, and you know the employers that are looking for certain types of individuals? This could take years for someone to accumulate the type of skills that perhaps are needed in some of these higher wage jobs. How do we get them, how do you connect with the partners out there to make sure that they get the skills or the help or the assistance they need for the social barriers that are keeping them behind?
Yeah, I mean, that is the $100 million question, but this is where we have so much opportunity. We know that there are tens of thousands of people out there who want to work that face some of these barriers. So we at the fund have tried to spotlight where those issues may be coming up. So we talked earlier about people who may not present with the formal education but have the skills. Mm-hmm. And so we have worked with others in the community around skills-based testing as an alternative path to that. We've put our reputation on the line on these transportation and mobility issues. Early next month, we'll be coming out and talking about the cost to collateral sanctions, and where are the collateral sanctions appropriate for which jobs, and what might be room for work there. And I think what you've highlighted is that it's a journey that people are going to be on, And so rather than thinking about somebody who's destined for the dead-end job, how can we think about that job as a gateway to a pathway? And some of the more creative employers in town and in the country are already thinking about that, but what we haven't done is systematize it. And, again, hopefully not to put too much pressure on this, but by having a group of thoughtful employers working in a sector, they can begin to think more strategically about what that path looks like, rather than just trying to respond to what the issue is today with 100 voices in their head.
If I may continue?
Sure.
So to understand that right now with unemployment being low and there's job opportunities out there that aren't being filled, do you think the opportunity right now for your organization to take out a program like this is maybe at its best opportunity? If unemployment was 8 or 9 or 10%, the opportunity of what you're looking for could be much more difficult. But perhaps because employers are looking for creative ways to bring a non-skill into the skilled environment, may take on someone that they may not have looked at if the employment rate was higher.
Yes. Yes. Even when unemployment was higher, employers were still talking about not being able to find the kind of talent they needed, but as Grace Kilbane and others could say, there was more of an ability to cream.
Right.
And it's such a tight labor market now that it is a beautiful opportunity for all of us to work with employers to say, okay, as I think it was Ted Carter, maybe it was Mr. Likensing, how do we get more people onto the playing field? Because we can do it, but it requires the kind of work you've described.
Right. Thank you. Very interesting. Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Tyler.
I had one question. So all this sounds great on paper. I guess my question is, how do we plan, and I don't know if this is for you, Mr. Whitehead, or maybe the administration, plan to get this program out to our residents? We have a lot of programs at the county. I talk to residents every day. Many of them aren't even aware of this program. So to Councilman Miller's point, and I think Mr. Fineman used an example of like the person going to get their food stamps or something. Do we plan to put an application about this program in their packet, or what strategic things do we plan to do to get the everyday resident involved in this program?
I think, first of all, I couldn't agree more that what looks good on the flip chart when you're drawing it up may not hit the ground. And I think that's what's going to need to be sorted out through this RFP process, is to understand not only how that intermediary is going to engage and bring employers, but what's the plan to engage the communities and the neighborhoods of Cuyahoga County in a meaningful way. And I don't think I know I don't sit here today with the answer to that. What I can assure you that as philanthropic funders, that's what we wake up every morning thinking about. Our job is the people of Cuyahoga County. And so, I think that's the work in front of us.
My last question, I see one of the goals is just to help residents with employment barriers that keep them outside the pipeline. I guess, Mr. Whitehead, what do you think, in your opinion, what are some of the employment barriers that keep, I guess, in your opinion, what do you think that some of the barriers are when you say help residents with employment barriers? What in your head, what are you thinking?
Well, it's everything from I don't have a reliable form of transportation, and the manufacturer where I want to work isn't on a bus line, and so I struggle to get there. And so how can I have a more reliable form of transportation? Or I may have childcare needs and my shift schedule doesn't align with what's happening with childcare, to where I may have had a minor drug infraction that is now on my record, and it excludes me from certain jobs, even though that was a mistake I've made and have amended for. We can go, right down the line with a whole host of things. And what we found through that work advance program I described before is often in this community, we have programs that address each and every one of those things, but they address them in isolation. And the beauty here of taking the supply chain approach is we can say, not only do you need childcare, you need help with career coaching, you need help with transportation, and you can begin putting together the bundle of capabilities that allows somebody to be able to succeed. Again, it looks great on the flip chart. It's a long way from the flip chart to making it happen, but through Work Advance, we saw those kinds of gains.
And that's great. And that's great. And I feel a lot more comfortable with this program coming in. I didn't, especially the $1 million from the Health and Human Service Fund, but that is coming from economic development. And so I wish you guys success. I see a lot of times what happens, especially with county programs, is that we give $1 million and we don't know what happened to the money. We have no metrics, and we don't even know if we really help people. So I'm hoping you guys break the mold and we have some real wins with this program.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. And just my only, I guess, comment to relate is I don't consider any job a dead-end job. I really don't. I consider any place that somebody gets a job, somebody pays them for an hour's worth of their time or money, gives them a sense of worth. Can we get them to a higher level? That's should always be everybody's objective if they feel that need is there. But I really believe that if somebody says, here's $1 and this is, that person walks away and says, somebody felt that my time was worth that they can feel good about it, and from that respect. So I speak that from having grown up in a household where a father dropped out of high school and never finished at Collinwood, and he did okay because he pulled chips out of his machine, and he did okay with saying, I can do something better with my life. So with that, are there any other questions from anybody out there? Hearing none, we've got this. We need to move this for the council for second reading. Is there a motion to move this for second reading? So moved. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Did you want to second it too? Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing that, all in favor, say aye. Aye. That's 3 ayes, and because I want to get a reading from the IG on this, because of my association with manufacturing, I'm going to abstain, but we have our 3 votes to get it on out. Thanks. Hearing nothing else, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody. This was very meaningful. And Deborah, I didn't know if you wanted to take the microphone, but I saw your head nodding and things of that nature. But there was a lot of work assignments that came out of this, so I hope everybody picked them up.
Mr. Chair,
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I cut you off?
Excuse me, Mr. Carter, can you turn the mic on? Turn the mic on.
So please feel free to do that now that you have a better grounding in what this is. So Mr. Schron has given us a couple of thoughts, so don't hesitate to do that, Mr. Hauser. Particularly, you have our commitment that the community is a key focus of this. And so, for all the discussion that's happened, this should be our best opportunity to move people from people up in sideline into this economy over time. It's not going to happen. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.